Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 226th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you watching on video, you'll see that Stan's not here. Stan is actually with his wife in sunny Spain. So we have a couple of guests who we have on who cover for Stan, but unfortunately they were not available today. So as I know our guest quite well, Nic Ponsford, I thought we'll just have a nice little cozy chat. So hello, Nic Ponsford. How are you?
I'm well, Frank Norris. Thank you for inviting me.
I don't think I've ever said your name like Nic Ponsford. It's always
I
been
know.
Nick. So anyway, yeah, yeah. Thanks for joining us. I have to say, folks, we've had a really interesting 15 minutes chat before we started recording. I just hope we can capture some of that
Mm.
in the recording itself. But before we get into it, Nick, do you want to just explain, a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, like I'm very bad at describing myself. When I get into my juicy geek spot, then I'm a lot more comprehensive, I think, for people. But so my name's Nic Ponsford, and I am a doctoral researcher, and I am founder and CEO of the Global Equality Collective.
So how did that all start then, Nick?
That's
Because
a
it's
long.
quite a big, I mean, I only got to hear about it because I was connected with you, but now I know a little bit more about it. It's quite a big organization, isn't it?
Yeah, it's evolving. I think it kind of, well, if we go way back, it
Yeah, yeah.
started when, when I was little and school was my safe place. So I then became a teacher in 2000, same year as the Google browser came in. And I love teaching. It was, I can't whistle. There's a lot of things I'm bad at, but I could teach. And I think part of that was not only sort of my love and where I felt that school was my safe place, was I loved being with the young people. I had run, summer play schemes and things like that when I was a teenager, and just loved being around young people. So when I started teaching, I thought education was all about opportunities. So I said yes to everything. So actually, I was a head of department as an NQT
Oh,
because
wow.
they'd asked if they did digital media because I'd done a little bit of advertising stuff before. And so I did English and media. And just really lent into every opportunity. And I wasn't very good at working out the perimeters. So if the kids wanted to do something, we did it. I took them on a trip to Los Angeles, and that was a lot of car washing. So I had a great time. I ended up winning a teaching award. I became an advanced skills teacher, and so 50% of my work was then outreach, and that was, I suppose, the start of me working in terms of looking at inclusion and technology from a kind of training point of view. And as I'd kind of fallen into teaching and been a leader, I was always in that kind of stance. And then Apple came in, iPads and stuff, and so that's I was kind of wheeled out to show people how to do it. So I kind of did that for about 10 years, and I was very fortunate. I was a real first kind of Labour baby, so I was a fast track teacher. I worked in one of the first Labour Academy schools, building school for the future. In fact, I was in Southampton Council when Michael Gove came in, and that got cancelled, so that was
All right.
annoying.
Well,
So I
yeah, a
did
lot of
that.
things happened in my life when he came in as well, which
Well,
ended up
that's
with
it. I'm
me
sure we're not
leaving
the only
instead.
ones as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of did all of that. And then I ended up, a short version, I ended up having a son who had needs, and I was told I couldn't be a senior leader if I couldn't be on site 5 days a week. So I actually
Oh,
had to
right.
come out of the classroom, which I was gutted. I won't swear, Frank, but I was
Yes,
gutted
yes,
about
yes.
that. And so I then worked for this is a long version of what the GEC is, but it will make sense. I then worked for an educational charity called Achievement for All, which was set up by one of the first professors of social mobility, Professor Sonia Blanford. And that work came out of, you might remember, the Lamb Inquiry.
Oh,
So it was
yeah, yeah.
looking at how we could help schools and school leaders in particular close gap for their SEND students. So that was back in, 2000 and the,
Mm.
11 kind of thing. So quite a while ago. And so I did that for about 9 years. I spent 4 years being a coach for schools across the south of England because I live in Bournemouth and no one knows if that's southeast or southwest. So I did that, and then following that, I had twins. 'Cause I've always been an overachiever, and then I wrote all the online training. So just before I set up the GEC, my background was a real kind of aerial view of education. Teacher training had been something I'd done from like the offset, and I'd always worked in schools where there'd been kind of high need or a challenge. I was headhunted to work at the school where Millie Dowler had been, and
Right.
I learned a lot of, not just about student culture, but the workplace culture there. So I kind of got to a point, and I really wanted to know what was going on, and there's a guy on Twitter, X, called Graham Andre, and he was in a program called No More Boys and Girls, which looked at the gender issues that we have in our classrooms. And I was kind of brought into some groups to talk about it. And I realised quite quickly that actually we didn't really know what to do when it came to close gaps. If we look at things like boys and literacy, white British boys, girls in STEM, things like that, when you start to look at the data, and this is what I started to do, I started to look at research, I realised that the data hadn't changed since like the 1960s. And you think our education model is from 1944, so that, it's quite a long time. So I then got a bit obsessed with where we were and why there was such a big gap and what we could do to move the chairs around a bit. And so that took me to firstly start a doctorate, so in education, so an ed at Bournemouth University online part-time, which may be finishing very soon.
You've got have you got, it's coming to a head, isn't it?
Yeah,
Next week.
yeah. I've got my viva next week, which is very exciting. So I've done 6 years of a doctorate, and what I was looking for whilst I was researching how do we get inclusion right and intersectional identity inclusion, I realised that actually technology was a way of capturing the voices in a way we've not done before, and also how we could use the technology to make it really easy for school leaders to run at scale ethically. And I couldn't find anything. So I talked about it with a few people, and that's how the GEC came along. So the GEC, the Global Equality Collective, is two parts at the moment. So the first part is a GEC circle. So when I'd been, an examiner or doing BTECs or, anything I'd kind of, or an AST, if there wasn't a network, I would be the one creating it and bringing people together.
Right.
And so when I want to look at inclusion, that's what I did. The GEC Circle is now the largest collection of EDI experts in education. We've got over 400 individuals and organisations. So we've got authors, academics, organisations like BayMed, who we're partnering with at the Festival of Education this year. So it's got all the people, because I was really interested in looking at not just one voice from a protected characteristic, but all the voices.
Yes.
Because as a school leader, we can get the extremes, but we kind of want a middle ground. So that's what I wanted to be able to do. And then I had an idea of what this platform would be. The DfE weren't so interested in neurodiversity and anti-racism back in 2018. So I got private investment in 2020. And this is a life story here. In 2020, and I had 3 days. I got headhunted to do the EdTech demonstrator program. Oh no, the first day was I got investment for the platform. The second day I got headhunted to do the EdTech demonstrator program, because then the next day we went into lockdown and my 3 kids came home. So that was a busy time. So we then did a crowdfund the next year, and I raised the money to build the platform. So the GEC platform is a report and support model for inclusion, and it's the first intersectional data collection. So I've launched the platform, and then what's happened is it's gone brilliantly, wildly, fantastically successful. And we've now surveyed 26,000 school staff and students on everything to do with the school experience from their point of view, or how they feel others do it around them. And we've just launched that report.
Well, you've just launched it this week, haven't you?
Yes, yes.
I mean, and actually, I didn't know when we set this chat up. I didn't know that was going to be published. So, I've been able to have a look at that report. I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it? In terms of I mean, the most stark thing is how the proportion of children who don't feel safe at school.
Yeah.
And I could go into a sort of rant about Ofsted and stuff like that, because obviously, it inspects all schools, but wouldn't find 64% of them, of children in those schools not feeling safe. So why do you think it is then that your survey enabled you to get to that figure when perhaps other surveys or other bits of research are not actually getting it as high as that?
Because I've worked really blinking hard on it, Frank. That's the short version. So part of the work that I did working with schools, particularly when I was working for Achievement for All, was doing focus groups and interviews with all the different groups. So I would do focus groups with students, I would do it with staff, and I would do it with parents and carers. And I'd spend 2 years with a school. So, I was definitely there more than some of the kids and sometimes more than the staff as well.
So you were
And
trusted. You were
yeah, I
trusted.
was like
Yeah.
some schools even gave me, my own lanyard, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I was part of the team. And I think because I'd been an advanced skills teacher, and because I'm a bit scrappy, I could kind of work up between the different horizontal and vertical levels.
Yeah.
And as I've said, people do tend to overshare with me. It's a gift. It's very annoying to my
Can
husband,
I
but
just say I did that before we started recording, so I just want to put that on record. But anyway, yeah, she's very good at getting you to chat
people
about
do tell
stuff.
me things.
I know,
But
yeah.
what happened in those focus groups, what they would also then say to me as we came out, is I couldn't say this because my line manager was in the room, or I
Right.
won't say that because I hate that teacher, or if I say that, I'm worried it's going to jeopardize my child. So then, in kind of a doctoral lens on, I started to realize that the data we get in education is actually really wrong. It's
Yeah.
unreliable,
Yeah.
And this is a lot of what we base our next steps on. The other thing that I realized was we tend to kind of we call them surveys, but they're actually quizzes. Teachers are very good at doing quizzes. Actually, when you do a survey, I've now worked with 5 universities and done at least 8 pilot studies with thousands of people, hundreds of schools. So I do feel I've got a little bit of a platform for this. Um, with a survey, we've worked with clinical psychologists. So I learned so much about how to create a survey, where to put non-applicable or not, how people engage with surveys. So all the workshops I've done, we had 50 student councils that designed a student one. I've really worked out that actually a lot of the time we design surveys to get that information in school. And I mean, you do surveys as well, but we do it for an outcome. So
Yes.
sometimes the
Yes.
questions can be quite leading. We also, because we're teachers, it's like, do it quick. Here's 5 questions. Here's 2 questions.
Yes.
Actually, the surveys that we've produced are really granular, because actually, if you want to get into people's phobic beliefs that they may not even know that they have, if you want to look at things like the modern sexism scale, anti-racist monitors, there's a way of asking questions where people will respond after so many minutes, or you need a reverse score question. So if I was listening to this, I'd be bored by what I was saying, but I now found it really interesting. So the surveys we do, firstly, the design, and also we've, had like just brilliant edtech developers support it. So even the buttons are designed like bubble wrap, so people want to keep pressing them for engage. So we've really overthought everything. The other thing we've done is there's 2 bits that are sort of linked to the research and what we do. So the first one is looked at data in a new way. So we do have quantitative and qualitative data, which Ofsted have said that they want around inclusion if they carry on with that. But we've also brought in lived experience. So the GEC Circle actually review all the questions and the language, because I don't have the lived experience of everyone. And I wanted to make sure that people felt that they were being really heard. So the language around things like microaggressions, or what happens when you go out socially with someone on your team, or what it looks like, when you reach for a book and someone from your family isn't there from a student perspective. We've spent a lot of time with that lived experience to help form those questions.
Right.
So we call it kaleidoscopic data, because it's a way of showing there isn't one size fits all. And we also let the staff and student surveys are anonymous, because there's an awful lot of surveillance, as we know, in schools, and teachers are even concerned that where they type their keystrokes can be monitored, and actually
Yes.
some schools
Yes.
they can
Yeah.
be.
No. I know.
So we have a magic link. It's anonymous. We do it to the highest academic standards of participation in surveys, and so people are protected as well, and they can self-identify the demographics. So again, the demographics that the DfE asked for are different to the Equality Act. So we've based it around lived experience. So we do ask about socioeconomic status for staff and students. And one of the reasons for that is, I should have been a free school meal child. And actually, it was too shameful for my family for
Yeah.
me to stand in that line with that band on. So I know firsthand that actually the data we're collecting in schools, I mean, not only is it not live, which ours
Yes.
is now, but actually, we're not even identifying the right groups of people in what we're trying to identify.
And this becomes a bigger problem as children get older and they're more aware, aren't they,
Yeah.
of their social standing and how different they may appear to be to their peers.
That's it. That's it. And there's the stuff above the waterline of visibility. So, your race, age, your sex, that kind of thing. But we find it's a lot of the stuff under that. And where we've got things like invisible disabilities. So, within that, some neurodivergent students would identify or not, or mental health can
Mm.
also be seen as disability, but not by everyone. So we've covered all the kind of circumstances of how people can self-identify, and the students and staff are able to do that in a way that's anonymous, which means the school leaders get a really reliable set of data about the people in their buildings, essentially. And I think that is really important as we're moving with things like disability, where we've got a medical model where people are waiting a long time for hospital appointments, and we know that we've got issues around neurodivergent assessments. This is a way of capturing how people really feel about themselves now and the issues or discrimination they might have or what can be celebrated. So it's not all bad. Like what we've identified, for example, that students with physical disabilities really do
But
feel a sense of belonging. Yeah, because as teachers,
I know
we can
you
see
can
that.
see it. Yeah,
Yeah, we can
absolutely.
see it. That's it. And so they're more likely to get an ECP, for example, and they're happy because they've been
Mm.
identified. So they do feel like that's great. What with the other side of it is, kids from single parent families. That's one of the big demographics that we've got shouting that they're missing school because of who they are. And
Yeah.
and so it allows us to see the full kind of, I suppose, colour spectrum of the good and the bad of what's happening.
Did you, when you were talking about pupils missing school because of single parenting, did you get to a sort of deeper understanding as to the sort of reasons why they were telling you they couldn't go in?
Yeah,
Were there some things that were challenging the sort of like the fairly sort of lazy view? Well, it's
yeah,
poor parenting, or
yeah,
whatever. They couldn't get
yeah,
them up in the morning, or mother
yeah.
was going out to work.
Yeah.
What were you
Well,
finding?
firstly, it's completely that. So the deficit model of when we hear data like that is what's going on in the home. The
Yes.
actual issue for them is what's going on in school. And that's a kind of a real flip because the way that a lot of leadership teams will look at things like socioeconomic status, single parenting is the issue is at home. At home is they're happy actually.
Yes.
They're quite
Yes.
happy there. They would rather stay there than come into school. And that's the problem because they don't see families like theirs. Maybe in the books of the curriculum, the way that they're being taught, there maybe isn't an appreciation of actually that they are maybe supporting more. They're maybe a bit older than because they need to be. So it is more about how we treat them in school than what they come in. Now,
Yeah, can I just challenge, just to say,
mm,
because I think we were talking before, I found I was watching a lecture from Professor Guy Claxton who
mm,
shared with me because I've started to get interested in his work, and it's sort of summer. It was in Australia, and basically the Australian teachers were talking in a similar way to where I hear sort of UK teachers who were concerned about the lack of attention being given to some of the creative subjects.
mm,
But Guy Claxton made the point. He said, trying to that children sort of transfer from a primary education into a secondary education. And I have to say, he was quite critical of secondary education because, in a way, his viewpoint being that it's too heavily driven by subjects.
mm,
And in a way, what he was saying was that recent research or research over time has suggested that this compartmentalizing of subjects is simply not helpful in terms of understanding your world. You need parts of this,
yeah,
but they need to be bolted together, and it's the bolting together which probably happens a little bit better in primary than it
mm,
does in secondary. And there's also the issues around attitudes to students and sort of all this sort of stuff. And the kids are going through puberty as well. I do appreciate,
mm.
the challenges that
Throw
teachers
that in the
have.
mix.
But there is something I think at the heart of that, which feels to me as if things aren't all right in primary education. but there is something based upon relationships and teachers really understanding or knowing,
Mm.
whether they like it or not,
Yeah.
some of the sort of nuances of the individual child, which seems to be completely lost to a certain extent, where you're
Yeah.
teaching 300 kids in a week.
Yeah, and I was a secondary school teacher, so I understand that, firsthand. And I taught both core subjects and vocational subjects as well, and sometimes at the same time. And that's why I didn't want to be, I was being pushed to be a head teacher. I started teaching when I was 23, and because I'd seen to have relative success. I mean, not just like an award and that kind of thing, writing, but actually my grades were pretty good as well.
Mm.
Um, but where I think I am now, so there's a couple of bits out of that. So we do know that things change. If we take the tech industries in, for example, there is the engagement younger pupils have. And my short version of that we do have an issue around how we have digital teaching and media literacy in our schools. Calling it computer science is something that I wouldn't have gone in
No,
for.
no.
Like the branding needs to be sorted,
I
I would
agree.
say.
I agree.
And when I did teach multimedia courses, I didn't house them in IT and the sciences. I house them in the arts directorate because that
That's going to be
creative
much
arts.
more appealing, isn't it?
It was, and so I used to get great numbers, but it was
Yes.
the same course, but the
Yes.
association actually was better. And I think the UK, what we don't always know as teachers because of that kind of institutionalized notion, how strong the UK creative industries have been, and actually what successful careers our young people can have in it,
Yes.
either going for university or not. Going back to the bit what you said about relationships, so as well as the kaleidoscopic data, the other new piece that I've kind of created, based on the research, is looking at something which is called social capital.
Yeah.
So when we look at things like, I think most people understand what cultural capital now, which I do really feel comes from a position of privilege again, which
Yeah. Yeah.
isn't so great. But social capital is about relationships. And so there are three different elements to social capital. And this, I think, is quite important for us in education, particularly the backdrop of technology and AI, that kind of the human relationships and actually getting kids into school and staying on site. If we want to have physical buildings, this is quite important. So the first way you can have social capital is it's called bonding. So bonding social capital is within a group. So
Yeah.
in our platform, we do look at it within those demographic groups. But if you think about, anyone that shares same sort of demographics or is a leadership team, it's kind of those feelings, which, if you feel part of it, that's great. But it can bring in things like we all kind of think the same thing and we're better
Yes.
as
Yes.
well. So it's a bit difficult. The next one is called building capital, which is when you start to understand different demographic groups. And we see this really done well in schools. We can see LGBT plus groups. Maybe we've got peer mentors who are neurodivergent. We're starting to see a kind of understanding of that. The problem in our schools, it doesn't really help get under the hood because there's a third bit, which is called linking social capital. And linking social capital is a leadership position. It's that strategy, it's that drive. And that's why I know it's where it can work in schools. It would be lovely if we had a real top-down approach, that this was coming from government and a real system thought. The good thing, I think, because schools and trusts are so context-based, actually, if you've got a leadership team in a school or a trust, they can do this just as well
Yes.
as you
Yes.
could do this everywhere. And in fact, you don't need it to come up there. So the social capital model and a framework for that, I think, is really important because it's how we make those connections and how those connections can help open doors for others and unlock that potential. So it could either be how you can support that new EHCT coming in, or how do we diversify our staff group? Or it can be how do we help our children understand people like themselves and people are different? But that leadership, that strategy that oversees it, I think is really key.
Right. Now I'm conscious we've got about 5 minutes or
Mm,
6 minutes to go. But one of the interesting things that you said before, and it's quite topical, was you have connections in America in
mm.
some, I think, independent schools in America.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to sort of give a little update as to how those schools are feeling at the moment around some of the issues that you've been talking about today.
Yeah, thank you. So the GC platform is has members from trusts and from schools. And though, I give massive discounts to our state schools because I'm a state school girl, we unexpectedly got international schools and independent schools interested. So Wellington College, Dulwich College have sort of been part of it, but also schools, Nord Anglia, which is a
Oh,
big
yeah.
group of schools. They've just renewed, actually. We've got a number of schools across all their regions, and they're doing it through an EDI lens. So obviously, with the change in administration in the
Yeah.
states, and where we're seeing EDI is being under attack, I think I can say that confidently. There's even things like websites where you can report your local school if you know they're doing anything around diversity and inclusion. It's that bad. So we are obviously keeping the conversation going with our schools in America to support them from a legal point of view as far as we can. But we're starting to hear both there and also in some of the, my WhatsApp groups I've got with GC Circle members, that parents in those international schools are now looking to take their children out and into schools in this country because it is not safe to have a child who identifies as trans. And where these, parents and carers that have got money and want to have the best for their children, they're now seeing the UK and England as a safe haven,
Right.
which might be quite
Well,
shocking to other
yeah,
people.
it's reassuring though, isn't it? That,
Yeah.
or at least there's, yeah, I mean, it might not all be right in the UK, but it's nice to think that it's a home for everyone, as opposed to those who are predominantly of one particular color, of one particular religion,
Yeah.
whatever. But one thing, it's interesting you should raise that because the point I wanted to raise this week was some interesting word that came from the Fisher Family Trust from Dave Thompson there, because it talked about there were a number of press articles about independent pupils in independent schools
Mm.
moving out and coming back into the state sector because of the VAT issue that's been imposed by the government. And interestingly, Dave's article asks a question: has there really been an exodus of pupils from independent schools? And it's really fascinating because the number of children that went into independent schools last year, that's before this was imposed, went up, which is really quite interesting because you would have thought, I think it'd been fairly well sort of messaged that this
Mm.
might happen.
Mm.
But the issue that has happened is that, yes, the number of children that have gone into independent schools overall has fallen this year. But actually, it's the fact that you've got to offset that against the fall in the demographics nationally, which all, we're facing that now in primary schools.
Mm.
So I'm hearing of a number of relatively large primary schools having to lose one of their reception classes
Mm.
because of the numbers are simply not there.
Mm.
So in a way, the BBC ran this story as well. So it's not just a sort of minor issue.
Mm.
But Dave's analysis showed that, it's nowhere near as simple as this. And actually, the number of kids overall is going down.
Yeah.
And to unpick this in terms of the independent schools is quite tricky.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just interesting that, I suppose a bit like you, don't, that your work is don't believe the headlines,
Yeah.
this
Don't
is
do the
true.
headline, and it's messy as well. Like I think we want quite binary headlines when it comes to this, but people are messy. People's identities change. I live in Bournemouth. When I had my oldest, the birth rate overtook the death rate for the first time. We've also got a backdrop of virtual schools. Following COVID, more parents got involved, obviously, with the education of their children, and they're making choices about, for example, kids with who might be identified as SEND go into the independent school because actually the mainstream school has got a reputation for being zero tolerance and they don't
Yes,
want their child
yes,
in an exclusion room. So there's and then also, the rise in virtual schools, homeschooling, with the support for parents through social media groups, etc. There's a very changing landscape, and I think we are moving to having twin environments, either digital or on-site or run by homes. People are opting out of traditional mainstream physical site education because they don't have to. There's alternatives. And I think that's only going to increase. If you look at the numbers coming into state schools, that has changed over the last few
Mm.
years with more homeschooling and virtual schooling happening. So, if we do want our kids and staff to feel a sense of belonging in school and to stay and to keep the best people and to, give the kids the best school experience, we do need to be starting to think about that social capital model, I think, those
Yeah, yeah,
relationships.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, we're going to wrap it up now, but I mean, in some respects, I think it's quite nice the way that you summarized your 26,000 voices report, because actually you made the case for, it's not all bad,
No.
and I think the story you gave around parents in America who are looking to come to the UK as a sort of safe place to bring up your children is also a positive message. And going back to that Guy Claxton video that I was watching this week, where he was talking very clearly about this, we must do something about the polarization that we've got ourselves into, and that there is a sort of common ground if only we were willing to talk in a more sort of professional and reasonable way with each other. Yeah. So anyway, that's the end of the 226th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. The Frank chat now, but Stan will be back next week. And Nic, can I thank you so much for your
Oh,
time this morning?
thank you. Pleasure.
Also, I always, I mean, a bit of feedback. Always find you're very engaging and energetic, positive. So it comes over. I've always found that. So thank you
Oh,
for
thank
that.
you.
And I
It was
hope
a
others
pleasure.
have experienced that this morning as well. So until next week, we'll see you then. And so once again, thank you, Nic.
Thanks, Frank. Bye.
Okay, bye everyone. Bye bye.